Quirks. They're a strange thing. There are three types of quirks: mutation, emitter, and transformation. Mutation quirks are much more different than regular quirks. Emitters allow the user to look pretty much the same as a normal human would, but they can blast stuff out of their body and stuff like that. Transformation quirks allow for the user to take on a new appearance. But mutation quirks are something that alters the person's appearance entirely. It is very strange when two mutation quirks make something entirely different. It is even stranger when a mutation quirk happens when neither of the parents have a mutation quirk. We begin our story with Inko Midoriya. She is about to give birth to a child. The child is to be named Izuku Midoriya. However, when the child was born, right off the bat it was obvious that he was a bit odd-looking. One second. Just plug in my phone real quick. Here we go. Unlike his mother or his father, he did not have the traits of either. Or maybe he did. He did have his mother's eyes. But as for the rest of him, well, that's where it got strange. The boy didn't have any features that resembled human whatsoever. In fact, he didn't even look like a human. The only human parts of him were the obvious human-like eyes, the line of hair that went down his spine, and the 5 fingers he had on his two front legs. Yes, legs, not arms. For some reason, when Izuku Midoriya was born, he did not look human in the slightest. He looked more He looked like an animal. The strange part was, he didn't look like an animal that is around today. He looked like an animal that was rather Jurassic. Izuku Midoriya. Quirk: Super Dimetrodon. He has the appearance of a Dimetrodon. He cannot speak due to the fact that the majority of him is pretty much a Dimetrodon. Although he does have traits that normal Dimetrodons do not have, like the fact that he can stand up briefly on his hind legs for a little bit, and his front legs act as arms when he's standing up on his hind legs. He can still use his front legs as hands, and there are other things that are strange about him, like his high intelligence. He also has the instincts of a regular Dimetrodon, but he easily has control over those instincts due to the fact that he has the mind of a human and not the mind of a not the mind of a primal animal. As Izuku was growing up, he knew he was different from the other students, but the other students didn't really seem to be bothered by him, which of course his parents expected, because as we all know, kids love dinosaurs, especially boys. Dinosaurs are one of the coolest things to them. So when several students found out that they were going to be going to school with a intelligent Dimetrodon, or what was a human that looked just like a Dimetrodon, or in their case a dinosaur, because they couldn't really pronounce the name, they were ecstatic. The kids were excited to be going to school with a dinosaur, an actual dinosaur, even if it wasn't, a real dinosaur, just a boy that looked like a dinosaur. Regardless of that, Izuku was very popular. Even though he couldn't speak, he could write, and he would use notepads a lot to write down stuff. Or if he didn't have a notepad, he would just write in the dirt with his claw. The person he spent the most time with was Katsuki Bakugo, who absolutely loved the idea of having a dinosaur as a best friend. Katsuki and Izuku wanted to be the best hero team there was. What could be more powerful than a hero that can make explosions come from his hands, and a dinosaur that has super intelligence? To be fair, though, Izuku's intelligence was kind of average for his age. But, it's not every day a dinosaur is able to, think like a human. However, there was one thing that Izuku lacked that Katsuki was rather annoyed by. Izuku didn't really like to fight. He was very timid and very, non-violent. For being a dinosaur that was supposedly a predator, he didn't really like to hurt people very much. He wanted to be a hero, but he really didn't like the concept of fighting. It wasn't until a couple older students were bullying one of the students from his class, and Izuku for the first time got angry. He charged at the boys and began to slam into them with his head, push them away with his claws. He wouldn't actually slash at them, and whip them with his tail, as his tail was somewhat long and was able to function as a whip. After all this went down, Izuku realized that while he didn't like to fight, fighting was something a hero would have to do to protect people who couldn't protect themselves. This made Izuku want to be a hero even more, and he wanted to learn how to fight, even though he couldn't fight like everybody else because he was, well, more animal-like than the others. He still wanted to fight, or learn how to fight. One day in class, the substitute teacher, because there was no teacher at the time, just put up a movie for them to watch. And oddly enough, it was Izuku's appearance in the classroom that just kind of like stroked this teacher's mind into putting up a dinosaur film. The dinosaur film happened to have many dinosaurs, including a Dimetrodon that was seen hunting and fighting with its claws. Izuku saw this and thought maybe he could somehow adapt the movements of a Dimetrodon into a fighting style of some kind. One day, in the middle of him and Katsuki training, Izuku had been getting rather into it, and he didn't notice that the sail on his back, or the symbol, or the pattern on his sail, began to glow. As it glowed, he started to get faster and pick up more speed, easily overwhelming Katsuki. He wasn't really noticing this. Katsuki was, but he thought Izuku was just taking it seriously for once. But then Izuku opened his mouth and roared, sending out a sound wave that sent Katsuki flying backwards. Izuku realized that maybe he had more powers than just what the normal Dimetrodon had. This resulted in him renaming his quirk from Dimetrodon to Super Dimetrodon. He learned that he could do many things that normal Dimetrodons could not. Because, of course, he had to remember that he wasn't actually a Dimetrodon, but someone who looked like a Dimetrodon, and his quirk was more than just being a Dimetrodon. He could shoot sound waves from his mouth. He could breathe fire. He could send a shockwave out of the sail on his back as a defense mechanism in case someone was coming up behind him. He could use his claws and his claws could grow and surge electricity as he could slash his opponents, paralyzing them for a brief amount of time. He could run nearly as fast as Ingenium, and he could even shoot little waves of red energy out of the tip of his tail. Now, these are not the normal traits of a Dimetrodon by any means, but that's why he named it Super Dimetrodon and not regular Dimetrodon. We now come to the part happens in canon with the sludge villain. Izuku and Katsuki had just left school. No problems because, of course, they're still friends. Izuku decided to take another pathway home just to see what would happen. On his way through a tunnel, he hears and smells something behind him. He turns around to see a giant blob of sludge with eyes and a mouth staring at him, and then before it starts rushing at him, saying something about wanting to take over its body, not realizing that Izuku is actually, a person and not just an animal. But before he could, Izuku sent out a shockwave from his sail, making the villain stagger and stumble back a little bit. Izuku then began to run out of the other end of the tunnel, but the villain gave chase. However, before the villain could do anything, that's when All Might showed up and splattered the villain. The wind pressure nearly knocked Izuku away too, but he dug his claws into the ground to make sure he didn't go anywhere. After All Might had sent the villain splattering, he was also kind of a bit shocked to see a dinosaur in the middle of the cave. Sorry, not cave, tunnel. All Might at first was a bit uneasy at the fact that there was a dinosaur staring at him, but then he noticed the look in the dinosaur's eyes. This was not the look of a predator or of an animal, but this was the look of somebody who was in awe. All Might realized that this must be somebody with the transformation quirk or something. So All Might went over to the dinosaur to check and see if it was okay. When he asked, he was rather confused when the dinosaur reached into the backpack that was on his side and pulled out a notebook and a pencil with his mouth before putting the notebook on the ground, opening it up, and using his right claw to write something on the book before handing it to All Might. The writing said, "I'm all right, thanks, All Might, and can I have your autograph?" All Might was at first confused, and asked why the boy was writing why the reptile was writing with a pen instead of responding. To which Izuku responded by writing that he could not actually speak English. He could only, because if he did, all that would come out would be roars and growls. All Might was rather intrigued at the fact that a mutation quirk would go as far as to making somebody look like well, not human in the slightest, despite the eyes and the strand of hair that was on top of his head. All Might and Izuku then went on their way, unbeknownst to either of them that the sludge villain had escaped. While Izuku was on his way home, he passed by a couple of people, none of them really bothering to stare at him because people were used to seeing a Dimetrodon walking around Yusutafu now. He heard a commotion nearby and went to go investigate to see what it was, and saw a crowd of people. He went through the crowd to see what was going on, and saw the sludge villain, but Izuku thought All Might had captured him already. Izuku, looking around, began to sniff the air for anybody who he knew had a quirk that could help stop this, but he smelled no one. But then he smelled All Might somewhere. But he looked around and didn't see All Might anywhere. The smell was coming from the direction of a skinny, frail-looking looking man, but that wasn't All Might. He was way too skinny to be him. He then caught on to a smell that was all too familiar, a smell he knew very well. It was Bakugo scent. The smell was coming from the sludge villain. He looked to see Katsuki was the one the sludge villain had in his clutches. Without a second thought, Izuku rushed forward to help his best friend, at a speed that nobody had ever seen before or achieved besides Ingenium, even if he was a bit slower. Izuku had managed to get to where the sludge villain was, and started breathing fire at the sludge villain. This, however, caused the fires around to get worse, and he realized this. So instead, he slapped the ground with his tail, sending a wave that was strong enough to at least put out some of the fires. Instead, he rushed towards the villain, elongated his claws, and slashed at one of the eyes, the villain luckily getting out of the way in time, well, for his sake at least. Izuku then realized something. The sludge villain was liquid. If he used his electric claws on the sludge villain, he could shock the villain. However, this would also hurt Katsuki, so he didn't want to do that. However, Katsuki knew what Izuku's thinking face looked like, and when he got some time to breathe, he shouted, "Do it, nerd! Don't worry about me, I can take your claws!" Without any more thought, Izuku rushed forward and sank his claws into the sludge before shooting the electricity through his body. The sludge villain was shocked and was knocked out, turning into just a puddle of green slime on the floor. Katsuki was let free and had a little bit of smoke coming off of him, but other than that, he was fine. He had managed to be able to tank Izuku's electric claws before. He could do it now. He, however, was choking on something, and Izuku went over to him and slapped his back with his tail, causing him to cough up the rest of the sludge that was in his mouth. The other heroes came over to see if they were all right, and got after Izuku for putting himself in harm's way. However, Katsuki spoke up and said, "You could have all done easily what my friend here did, but instead you all stood back and didn't think about what you could have done." It was then that All Might appeared and said that he agreed with the young man, saying that they all could have easily had found other ways to take down the villain. But instead they were too focused on other things. While the crowd and the other heroes were preoccupied with All Might, Deku and Katsuki went on their way home, with them eventually splitting up. While Izuku was on his way home, All Might came in front of him, saying, "I am here." At first, Izuku was shocked, but then he was surprised. He was wondering why All Might was there, and began to pull out his notebook. But as he was pulling it out, All Might then poofed into a cloud of white smoke, revealing the same skinny man he saw before. Izuku now realized why his favorite hero scent was coming from the skinny man. They were the same person. Izuku then began to approach his hero before he began to sniff at All Might. He smelled something that was off with him. He then using his one of his front legs, lifted up All Might's shirt to reveal a very, very terrible looking scar. Izuku was shocked at this, but then without a second notice, opened his mouth and bit into the scar. All Might at first screamed in pain, but then realized that the pain was going away, and not only was the pain going away from the bite, but the pain was going away from his injury as well. He looked down to see that his injury was gone. there was no scar or anything. He looked up. He was still skinny, of course, but that's what not being able to actually eat solid food does to you for a while. It does to you after so many years. He looked over at Izuku and said, "How?" Izuku then wrote in his journal and showed it to All Might, saying that his when he bites somebody, he actually has a healing venom that he can inject into someone that can heal pretty much anything. He doesn't really reveal this that often because he knows what would happen if people found out about it. Also, he knows that it would be very traumatizing to be bitten by a Dimetrodon. All Might then asked what exactly his quirk was, because it was more than just being a Dimetrodon. Izuku explained that his quirk was actually called Super Dimetrodon, and that he was capable of doing many things that Dimetrodons shouldn't be able to do. Not only that, but most quirks aren't able to do. All Might said that his quirk is very versatile for one that looks so simple. Which was Izuku responded by writing that he is still discovering new powers today, to this very day, that he hasn't discovered yet. All Might then told him the reason why he wanted to find him, and that he saw a true hero in the boy that day. Even if the boy looked like a dinosaur, like an animal, he was more of a hero than anybody else that day was. And while even though many people would have said that it was reckless for him to shoot electricity through the sludge villain and hurting the hostage too, he realized that they knew each other and that they probably have trained together more than once. All Might then explained about One for All and how he wanted Izuku to be the next wielder of it. Izuku didn't know what to say. His idol wanted him to be the next wielder of his powerful quirk. Izuku accepted his offer, and All Might wanted his help in cleaning a beach. Izuku already had a body that was fit enough for the quirk, especially considering the fact that, well, he'd been training for so long, and the fact that he was much bigger than most of the other students in his grade. Remember, while Izuku does have the body of a Dimetrodon, and while his body does grow differently than others, his age still remains the same. He still ages like a human does. Since Izuku is getting One for All way earlier in the story than he does in the actual canon, All Might had plenty of time to train him on how to use it. However, All Might's methods for teaching him how to use One for All, which was clench your butt cheeks and yell from the depths of your heart smash, wasn't very good, so All Might had to get help from his old teacher, Gran Torino. In doing so, Izuku finally learned how to use, as he called it in canon, full cowling. Izuku had actually told Katsuki about what was going on and how he obtained more power, with Katsuki, of course, at first being a little bit irritated that now he has to do more to keep up with his best friend and rival. They were already on equal footing with one another, but now he had to work harder in order to make sure that they stayed equal. In one of the training sessions that he was doing with Katsuki, he accidentally broke Katsuki's arm with his tail, in which he attempted to heal Katsuki. However, this had a more shocking turn of events. Not only did Katsuki get healed, but his quirk seemed to get boosted somehow. Then, red steam started to come off of Katsuki's body, as his hair began to spike up slightly, even though it's already spiky. Katsuki then began to ricochet off trees, similarly to how Izuku uses full cowling. But then when he landed towards Izuku and slammed a kick into Izuku's side, a few seconds later, an explosion hit triggered from Izuku's side right after Katsuki had released his footing. Katsuki's quirk had been supercharged by One for All due to Izuku's bite. Izuku realized he could now give other people supercharged versions of their quirks. He didn't know for how long, but he knew that he could do it. And the red steams properties coming off of Katsuki was proof of that, and the fact that he could pinball off of trees like he could with full cow. He can also now trigger explosions after he laid sweat on his opponents. I know that sounds gross, but think about how useful that would be for him. Also, his combat skills were much more advanced, now allowing Katsuki to keep up with Izuku more. A few months had passed, and Katsuki's effects that he had been given from having his quirks supercharged never went away. They were permanent. Izuku could permanently supercharge other people's quirks. We now come to the time where Izuku and Katsuki are coming to the entrance exam. As they're coming in, several students who were not from around the area could be seen staring at Izuku, and the boy who was just casually walking next to a large dinosaur that from walking on all fours nearly met Katsuki at eye level. Yeah, Izuku's pretty big in this, because remember, he's a dinosaur. As they begin began walking. They noticed a brunette girl who began to trip over a piece of concrete that was wedged above the others. Izuku shot out his tail and caught her before she could hit the ground and pushed her back upright. The girl stared at the two for a minute. The boy not really seeming to be bothered by the dinosaur standing next to him, and the dinosaur was just looking at her with a concerned look as though she asking if she was okay. The girl thanked Izuku and began to walk away. Izuku nodded his head and kept walking, as he can't really speak. When they got to the auditorium to explain about the practical exam, when President Mike got on stage, Izuku began doing his usual fanboy thing, but because he doesn't really mutter in this, he unknowingly growls lowly out of excitement. Katsuki was just looking at him from the side, just kind of like smirking and laughing at his friend's antics. It wasn't until a boy with dark blue hair jumped up and began to talk about the fourth robot before turning around and was about to say something to Izuku, but froze as he saw a Dimetrodon sitting there. The boy was then silent for a couple of minutes before turning around and sitting back down, not really knowing if he should try and not really knowing if he should scold the creature that could possibly eat him in a single bite. Of course, Katsuki and Izuku were disappointed that they couldn't work together in the practical exam, as they were put in different areas. But as they were put on the bus, with Izuku having to sit in the middle of the bus because of his massive size, and not being able to sit in the actual seats, there were several students staring at him, because it's not every day you see a Dimetrodon that has the intelligence of a human just casually sitting on the bus like it's no big deal. As they began to wait for the test to start, the girl from before came up to Izuku to thank him again. With the boy from before, who wanted to say something about distracting one another, but couldn't bring himself to do it due to the fact that he was still somewhat afraid of the obvious dinosaur in the room.